Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties Radio, Season 6, Episode 19. My name is Lee, I'm in Western Australia. Joining me is two fantastic gentlemen. We've got Zeev in Canberra. Zeev in Canberra. Vikas in
That'd have been a
Canberra.
cold day in hell.
Vikas in Canberra. I don't know, Melbourne's, yeah. Yeah, no,
although
actually,
Canberra,
would
although Canberra is pretty
be. It
cold.
is pretty cool, yeah. And one could
Yeah,
say it's hell.
yeah.
We've got
I
Vikas
think,
in
I think,
Canberra and Zeev in
yes,
Melbourne.
yeah.
Hello, my name is Vikas, and I am an engineer. That's it.
I think it was -4 last night,
Oh,
or
geez.
something like that.
Cold over there.
Yeah, I know. Everyone was going like, "This is a warm winter," and I'm sitting there going like, "It always gets coldest in August."
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, Perth, like, because it's on the coast, and I don't know, I think in particular, because we don't get snow or anything, it's like, it never gets, even if it gets to zero, that's like unbelievably freezing cold. So,
We haven't had it.
We don't get snow either.
I think it gets snow in Canberra.
No, we just get the blistering cold.
Oh, I thought because there was enough mountains there, you got snow.
You gotta get humidity for snow, mate.
Okay, fair enough. So anyway, leaving aside winter weather discussion, welcome to Taking Liberties Radio, the winter weather discussion episode. We are going to talk about two topics. We're going to talk about Queensland University of Technology, I do believe it is, QUT. They had some protests against, in favour of the Hong Kong protests that went.
They were actually opposing the
Interestingly.
They were actually opposing the Confucius Institute that was, Confucius Academy that was starting up there. And for anyone who's not familiar, the Confucius Academy is basically the Chinese equivalent to the Ramsay Center. It's basically it's a propaganda school that is set up on a legitimate university campus to teach effectively pro-Chinese national history.
Okay.
If
Wow.
that makes any sense.
Okay. So that's that. Well, we'll get back to that in a sec. And we're also going to talk about Crown Casino and Kevin Rudd expressing kind of horror that, political power can be used to serve the interests of special interests. How shocking. How unpredictable. Who could have ever predicted such an outcome? So let's start with this.
I feel like we'll get to it when it comes to Canberra.
So
let's talk about there is points to be made.
Yep. So let's talk about the QUT thing. So essentially, there was these demonstrations, I guess you could call it, or protest, where, as you said, against the Confucius Center. So basically a Chinese Communist Party propaganda outlet, and it got ugly. So there was a counter protest. So pro Chinese Communist Party supporters came along, were roughing people up. The cops essentially shut down the protest against them, sent everybody home. There was, and now, well, we can get into the Andrew Cooper thing in a sec. So let's just talk about, there's a lot of talk about Chinese influence, particularly within the kind of the policy sphere, like defense policy sphere, where you've kind of got two angles where you've kind of got pro-Chinese people saying, hey, let's not talk about South China Sea, let's not cozy up to America. And then you've kind of got the other side, which is, hey, let's go all out belligerent against the Chinese, let's support US containment policy. This kind of, I guess it interacts with, that's the normal discussion. This is kind of a separate discussion which has come up, which is how much the Chinese Communist Party is trying to influence politics and influence kind of domestic, particularly through the domestic student population, the international student population, how much they're trying to influence the discussion of these topics.
So, I'm going to be using a terminology that's been used several times here at the several times amongst international policy people here in Canberra, and that is so they usually call the Russians late imperialists. They refer to Chinese as the never imperialists. And the reason why is because they're always so late to this empire game that by the time they get there, they're not really able to do it. So this Confucius Academy sort of thing is just, it's a carbon copy of the Ramsay Center. It's a carbon copy of the US was it the US, is the Commerce Studies, U.S. Commerce Studies. So U.S. has the United. Sorry, no, it's the U.S. It's the United States Center. United States Research Center. But there's one of these schools inside University of Sydney already. There's another one inside University of Melbourne. But these have been in operation now for 20 or 30 years. The United States has been doing this for the last 50, 60 years. They've been starting up schools and universities worldwide as a soft power play to university students who are going through international relations.
Yep.
And the idea is basically they can create future diplomats from those countries that speak in terms of what their ambitions are for that country. Right? And the idea is basically you're going to make contacts in the US, which will make it easier for you to come to the US and negotiate deals on behalf of your country. That's how it's sold. The Confucian Academy is just the latest iteration of that. And to be perfectly honest, I sit there going, like, as much as people are raising shit about it, I don't think it's actually that effective.
Yeah.
Just because it's so late to the game. Like, we have much better deals going with China without the need for these kind of schools.
Yeah. And
Well,
if I can just make a quick sidestep into kind of maybe why the Chinese government is thinking of doing such a thing. You know, I mean, there's a lot of panic about, say, the Belts and Roads Initiative, which is essentially just the Chinese government spending like a shit ton of money on ports and roads and all this kind of stuff.
They put themselves into a shit ton of debt, by the way. If
Yeah,
you take a look
exactly.
at them, they used to be the world creditor. Now they are just as much in debt as the United States is.
And you know, there's a lot of talk about sort of South China Sea belligerence, and I mean, I can understand, particularly sort of both with China and with Russia, why they might be pushing back against US hegemony, because I mean that's really ultimately the kind of subtext of the kind of anti-China, you know, line of thinking is essentially the US should be able to do whatever the fuck they want. They can, you know, and
more or
you know,
less they
if
can.
I was China or if I was Russia, I don't know if I'd want US aircraft carriers in the South China Sea. I don't know if I was Russia, I'd want, you know, missile bases and troops in Ukraine or in, you know, I mean, this is the whole thing about like NATO expansion. You know, like if you push against the Russians, if you put all these essentially US allies on the Russian border, they're going to get a bit antsy. They're going to wonder, well, are we really that safe? Because certainly if Russia was trying to set up, you know, Russian troops in Mexico, the US might be, hang on a sec, we're not so cool with this. So I think one of kind of the underlying sort of assumptions is, which I'm against because I'm against US imperialism and therefore I have some minor sympathy with the Chinese, is that it makes sense for them to kind of push back a bit and sort of create a sense of it's okay for China not to be completely surrounded by US troops, you know, and so on, and you know, completely dominated by US influence.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
because
if we can just return for a moment to the scene of the protests, one of the things that I think needs to be highlighted is that the Chinese consulate endorsed the actions of the Chinese counter-protesters, and the Chinese consular officer who did that is actually being appointed a professor at that very university. So, and this is according to an article in The Guardian, by the way. So essentially, the violent acts of the Chinese counter-protesters on the scene were endorsed by a now appointed professor of the university. So while I take on board comments that this is all too little, too late, etc., it is still a body by which the Chinese government can, at least to some extent, push its values and propaganda on Australian students. And there can be little doubt that people like that professor are willing to do that when necessary. So that's one thing. We've covered a lot of topics there. There was some discussion of American imperialism and so on, but I think that kind of distracts from the point of the protests, which had little to do with the America-China conflict and more to do with China's treatment. First of all, the installation of the institutes, of the Confucius Institutes, but second of all, the issue of the protests in Hong Kong, again, was at the forefront of those protests, so to speak. So, to my mind, at least, it's fairly clear that this is it's a professor at a university endorsing acts of violence at the university, and I'm a little taken aback by that, to be honest with you. That would be my first instinct to say, what on earth is that university doing, taking that person on, and they should seriously consider letting that person go. Because
I don't think it's unusual for Australian universities to take professors who advocate for violence, to advocate for political violence. It's pretty much a time-honored tradition at our universities.
Maybe I can't say because offhand, but certainly to me,
I can point to one really good example, which Conservatives always love. Ros Ward. She hasn't lost a job.
Right.
Well, did she advocate violence though?
Against Conservatives, yeah.
Okay, that's so long ago. When you said the name, I'm like, oh yeah, that one. That's an old one.
Yeah.
I mean,
no. I'm legitimately serious.
Sure.
I've seen professors very left-wing professors during the voluntary student unionism days. There were university professors out there who were going like, we got a John Howard's a fascist. You got to take him out and all of this other stuff. I'd say a university professor in Australia probably would advocate violence at least once or twice in their life, on average.
Yep. I mean, I guess.
Look, advocating violence on campus and endorsing violence on campus is a little different to advocating violence in the abstract against abstract people.
Yeah, and let's just be clear.
Most people would probably, without realizing it, advocate violence against abstract people whom they haven't met all the time. That's politics. But that's quite different to advocating violence in your own workplace.
Yeah. And I think also just to sort of add,
I'll take that point.
I think because you're not saying it's good that they advocate violence. You're just saying it's not a double standard. It's not an unusual standard for them. Like, I'm sure you would agree that generally it's a good idea for people not to advocate political violence.
If that wasn't clear.
Yeah. He's just saying, like this professor is shit, but other professors are also shit. So let's lower the standard of expectation of what we should expect. And I think that, so even though I've said, hey, I'm a little bit sympathetic for sort of Chinese foreign, their disposition towards the US, I definitely don't think that the Communist Party sending their lackeys to intimidate local students, and particularly, pro Hong Kong or pro Taiwanese, or any kind of independence movement types, because there's definitely, from time to time you read about news reports and op-eds that basically talk about how Beijing tries to silence opposition overseas and intimidate students who are studying overseas, just to sort of keep them all.
So I'm not sympathetic to the Chinese at all. I think they're a government that's in urgent need of reform, and they really need to tone back some of their more authoritarian tendencies. Having said that, I don't think the issue of this priest. See, I think of professors as priests. There you go. That's the religion. All that aside, I don't think the issue of professors advocating for violence is all that unusual. Yes, my expectations for Australian universities are incredibly low, and yet they still keep tripping. So take that as you will. I don't think QUT will do anything about it. But also, I think it's actually the problem of the students of Australia. A large part of the craziness about this is because of the students of Australia not being as discerning about which universities they choose to associate with. And I think in part it's also industry in Australia for not being as discerning about which industries they wish to associate with. So look, personally, I think I think a lot of these things might be solved if people just go, okay, QUT has obviously jumped the shark here. Maybe we should probably step back a little until they sort their shit out. Pretty much what, something that would never happen in Australia, but happens in the US all the time. So if you take a look at which university was it? The one that got sued recently, and lost big time. It was like a $33 million suit.
I can't remember.
It had something to do with the pie shop. Anyway, we'll have to look it up.
Yeah, I know which one you mean. Yes, no, there is one.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah,
look it up.
yeah. So that school took a massive tumble in admissions in the semester that's starting right now. So that kind of stuff happens in the US.
College.
Yeah, there you go, Oberlin College. That kind of stuff happens in the US anytime there's like a massive scandal at a university. Doesn't quite happen here in Australia because they're all publicly funded. There's a big national scheme to get people in. It's a rationed seller's market as opposed to a buyer's market. And maybe we should talk about how economically that gives a dud deal to students, but I doubt people are interested in that because they'd rather have free education.
Sure.
So is it a factor then that these institutes are open up because universities lack money? Because that seems to be something that some of them are putting out, that we're opening these institutes because there's less public funding and more foreign students, and therefore we're taking the money. I don't mean to verbal people, but I did see something more or less like that as a justification.
Sure. I mean, I think generally speaking, so I mean, this is an issue not just for, Chinese money.
QUT's annual budget from the government, from the Australian government, federal government, is $230 million.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's a lot of money.
That's just from the students. Right? So I can understand what they're saying because they've said I pulled an old figure. My bad. Apparently it's $992 million. I was off by over a factor of 4. Sorry, this is my fault. I read the very first line in here in the Wikipedia article and it said 220, but that was an old figure from the early 2000s. It's now 992 million apparently.
Okay.
But there you go. So it's a shit ton of money. So I question they don't get enough money question.
Sure. I mean, I guess in the...
I don't know how much it costs.
Sure.
I don't know how much it costs to run a university.
Yeah, though. I mean, I guess this is where the whole, a public choice, which we might get into as well later on if we have enough time, but the public choice element of bureaucrats always wanting more funding. So this is an issue in government that if government departments don't spend their budget, then they're deprived of their budget, and they'll cut the budget for future years. So there's an incentive for government departments to spend all the available money and then cry for more because they have the incentive. So I mean, yes, 200 and whatever the budget you said is, it's a lot of money. But they always
according
want more.
to, pardon me, but according to their financial statement, their total income from continuing operations is $1 billion in the 2018 financial year, and of that, government grants, direct grants, make up $385 million. Help payments make up $248 million, and let's see what else have we got here.
Yeah, thanks for sorting that out. The Wikipedia article is confusing.
I don't know. I'm just looking at page 35. Hopefully I'm reading it right, by the way. The numbers are quite staggering. 1 billion? It can't be $1 billion in revenue, surely. This is a university. I mean,
no. People don't know this. Okay, so people think universities are like these paupers of Australian society. They are not. They're our third biggest export.
You're quite right. And even in 2016, the total revenue was $992 million, according to, there you are. So, I mean, these institutions are fairly cashed up. And, I mean, perhaps it's an error of judgment on their part to take money from foreign governments to open up new centres of learning. I mean... If you want to teach Chinese, why not just open your own center of learning for Chinese rather than...
Again, like I said, I actually don't think it's a problem for these propaganda schools to be in there. I mean, they're pretty transparent. It's not like they say, "Oh, this is a place that teaches you, a neutral Chinese history," right? They're pretty open about the fact that they are propaganda centers, right? The U.S. Studies Center, for example, is definitely on that side. So, I mean...
Well, I definitely think that's a bad thing. I mean, a U.S. Studies Center is quite different, at least, to one that is a Chinese Studies Center. At least that's got to present somewhat of a balanced picture.
You think so?
Yeah.
You'd be wrong, but you'd think so. Look, I have the same position on this school as I do in the Ramsey Center, right? I am 100% on board with students pissing away their money on a useless degree. I'm totally fine with it.
Thank you, Vikas.
But as a current student, I can tell you that I'm definitely pissing away my money.
Yeah, definitely. I'm totally fine with every person. I'm totally fine with it. I just don't believe the taxpayer should subsidize it. So as long as it's private, I don't care.
But I don't think this. But this is not private. It's money from the Chinese government to open. Is it money from the Chinese government, incidentally?
God, I hope so. Fine. If the Chinese government wants to subsidize a shit degree for Australian students, I say let it.
Teaches them that China's Communist Party is, the light of the universe and the heavens. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that. I mean,
I don't know. I'm not comfortable with socialists either, but hey, they're all over our universities and publicly funded. That's my real concern. Yeah. I'm just like, open up your own socialist studies center, right? Come in, all, learn about the joys of Marx. Just do it without taxpayer money. That's my only concern.
That's
I'm okay with anyone teaching whatever stupid. They can teach homeopathy for all I care. Just don't take public money.
I mean, I think
I'd call it the just add water.
Sure. School. I mean, to be fair, anybody who is privately giving money gets the same argument as, government organizations giving out money, which is, various forms of conspiracy theories. And, like when Soros funds things or the Koch brothers fund things, you get very much the same argument. So I'm not entirely sure there's necessarily like the concern about these things is, it's only, private money's fine, but like, public money is terrible because when ideological individuals give out, if Gina Reinhardt were to give the Ramsey Center is the perfect example. That was a private donation to universities, and people flipped their shit. And
not me.
Yeah. Well, not you.
I was totally fine with it. I would it's fine. It's a shit degree. Yeah. It's all privately funded. Yeah. They're not on the taxpayer teat.
Yeah.
If you want to complain about it, complain about it.
And broadly speaking, we would write, of course. We don't have a policy position as a podcast, but I think if we did have a policy position, we would say everything should be privately funded or close to it. So that's fine. But I'm not uniquely concerned about this Confucian Center. I think, okay, sure, we know it's a probably a Communist Party funded or a government Chinese government funded operation. That's fine. The ideas they promote are totally in the public sphere. Like, it's not like they're secretly brainwashing them. It's not like they're, taking people into, into centers where they hold their eyes open and bombard them with images a la A Clockwork Orange. They are sharing ideas. Those ideas are either good or shit. People can decide whether those ideas are good or shit just in open discussion. So I'm not bothered by the fact that the Confucius Center exists. Everything they suggest can be debated publicly. And so, I mean, unless there is some sort of, even if there's I think conspiracy theories about, the Chinese Communist Party in infiltrating and overwhelming Australian universities is just kind of stupid. In the same way as I think it's stupid when they talk about...
Especially since they're so openly doing it through our casinos.
Yes. Wow,
and that's such a convenient tie-in.
That is a segue. Okay, so
what a segue. Well done.
Speaking of public choice, Kevin Rudd recently at the Byron Bay Writers Festival, which just sounds like the most abysmal shit to visit any time in my life. He was speaking where he talked about...
He's fallen a long way, hasn't he?
Yeah. He basically complained about seeing a bunch of Labour figures moving to be working for Crown Casino, or
Together with Liberal figures.
yes, with Liberal figures, or joining industry pressure groups. So it talks about Stephen Conroy, our good friend, undies on his head, Stephen Conroy, the architect of the brilliant NBN. He's gone to work for responsible wagering for Australia, which, I mean, if there's ever been an industry body that sounds more like an industry body for that would be it.
What was it? Responsible what?
Responsible wagering for Australia.
Oh, fuck me.
Yeah.
It's an anti-gambling group, isn't it?
No, it's bro gambling.
Oh.
So yeah, because Kevin Rudd,
Because it's
he
for
described-
responsible
yeah,
wagering.
responsible
It
wagering.
suggests that you can
Yeah.
wager responsibly, which
Yeah.
is a
So
counter
Kevin
to
Rudd
the-
criticised that group as being a front for the gambling industry, which probably is. So
I'd hope so.
and yes, he
I
noticed
mean, with a
that,
name like that, I'd hope so.
yeah. So I mean, this is basically, for libertarians, we look at this and go, yeah, no shit. Like all of these government ministers with all of their contacts with government departments and understand of policy and all the skills that they've literally spent decades honing. Because the people who become ministers in the Liberal Party or the Labor Party literally have to spend decades building up their contacts, building up their value in the party. And so when they finish, the only logical use for those skills is becoming lobbyists, becoming like contacts between and there's much the same with Christopher Pine and Julie Bishop joining various companies after they quit. So
yeah, and I was actually really surprised by the fact that got ruled as not weird. Sorry, that didn't break the rules. But then again, so it's the funny thing about all of this is we do have these laws in place, and it's not. The problem isn't that the laws are in place. The problem is that Parliament can basically. Okay, so
Hold on. We need to backtrack just a moment, I think, and give a background to what this Crown controversy is about, don't we?
right. So basically,
yeah,
sure.
Go for it.
You explain, Lee.
Okay.
Oh no, Zeev, do you want to go for it? Since you,
Sure. So, in a nutshell, Crown Casino has been found to be organising express visas for high-stakes Chinese gamblers who basically want to hop over to Crown, gamble a ton of money, and then go back. And essentially, as I understand it, that's the controversy. There's more to it in the sense that some of these gamblers have links to organised crime, and there's more to it because the Crown organisation has been doing this via an individual called Tom Zhu, who is wanted by Interpol for serious crimes and is involved in Chinese government influence activities in Australia. And in turn, the Crown has been organising this via a serving Australian Border Force official who moonlighted in his past employment as a police officer, I think, to provide security for Mr. Zhu. Oh, excuse me. So, as I understand it, Crown is organising visas for high-stakes gamblers by someone who has links to organised crime. That appears to be the controversy. And, I mean, even certainly other gamblers who have links to the Chinese government have been expelled from Australia, it seems, and who got into Australia via these visas. If you remember, there was a controversy about one donor being expelled last year, Huang Xing Mao, who was a permanent resident, I believe. But ASIO got him expelled from Australia over his foreign influence activities. And yeah, I mean, I think
broadly, that seems to be what all of this is about.
Yeah.
It's not clear exactly whether there has been a breach of the law. It just, I'm struggling to see where exactly that is. What is the allegation of illegal conduct here? Crown is offering tours, Crown is getting express visas, but is that in itself are the visas in breach of the law? That's not actually said. It's not. It's unseemly, maybe, but is it illegal? I wonder.
100% illegal. You can't associate with
100
anyone in this country.
Yeah,
No,
that's it.
no. I get where you're coming from.
It may well be illegal. Maybe getting those visas processed ahead of other visas or something, that could involve a breach of the law. But
Sure.
what's strange to me is that there's nothing in the articles to say that it is. It's just a lot of stuff about people having links with other people, having links with other people.
Yeah.
We're just playing 6 degrees of separation with Chinese. Business people.
To be
again, and they're
some of this
gambling
is-
at Crown Casino. How outrageous!
Some of this is that's. In some way, this is also explained for the same reason why Crown or industry front groups will hire former ministers. Why they will go looking for officials who are amenable to, assisting them. These rules. Essentially, these companies have to deal with complex rules. Immigration is not an easy set of things to navigate, and certainly having access to information or people who can speed up the process is going to be valuable.
Well, look,
if you really get into it, Crown was able to get out of all sorts of things. All sorts of regulation was drawn up that was favorable to their group. So, I understand. So the big thing that stood out was when the 5 crossbenchers in the lower house put a bill forward saying that there should be a royal commission into Crown Casino's activities, and Labor and Liberal, because at the behest of all of their lobbyist mates, basically stood on the no side, saying there's no evidence that there's any corruption going on at Crown. I think if there was a royal commission, I think they'd find that there probably is a fair amount.
I'm not sure
not
exactly.
Fair amount of corruption, not corruptions per se, but a lot of favors being traded back and forth for favorable legislation. I think that's what they'd find, and it's not as if we can't see the effect of that, right? How many times do you see alcohol legislation that seems to be written in a way that's very, very, very favorable to the large bars and clubs that exist within the Crown, while being very unfavorable to places outside? It's not at all unusual. I would not be surprised to find a royal commission that finds that. But in terms of the corruption that those 5 crossbenchers were saying, I don't think you'll get there. It's when you're big and powerful enough, you make the rules, so you don't have to break them.
Interesting. Yeah,
it's interesting also that they appear to be pushing for not a royal commission, but according to this article, they were pushing for a joint select committee to investigate the allegations. Specifically, the relationship between Crown Casino and governments, including the role of former members of state and federal parliament, quote unquote.
I'd be interested to see that.
Well, no doubt there is one. I don't think they'd reveal much direct criminality. Maybe they might, but
no, you wouldn't. You wouldn't reveal criminality.
You'd see a lot of lobbying, and you'd see a lot of maybe some unseemly people with links to the Chinese government getting here and spending a lot of money at Crown. You know what? Better they spend it at Crown than spend it on something totally worse in China, I guess. I don't know what they're going to spend it on there.
We could go into a separate discussion of the morality of corruption, in that it's actually maybe in a world where there's stupid rules, maybe it's better that there's corruption to sort of facilitate these otherwise free exchanges. But that's probably a separate issue, which is quite interesting. Yeah, but anyway,
Yeah,
let's
sure.
finish up.
Certainly, casinos are used for money laundering as well.
Yes.
That's another common use for them. I don't know if that directly ties into this. It could well, because people with tons of money like to move it around easily, and that could be a motivator for them to fly in and fly out, so to speak, without too many questions being asked. But
Sure. But I guess, look, what I was saying is, what I really hope any of these committees or discussions would go towards is basically, we all know this happens, right? All the politicians leaving and becoming lobbyists. Now, here's the thing: that's actually forbidden inside the government, right? Like for a above the line contractor or someone working directly for the Commonwealth, to then go to a below the line company, like a company that's delivering them products, right? That's strictly forbidden, with an up to minimum 6, maximum 18-month gap where they can't bid on work which they had worked on, right? Now, this is actually regulated, and I found this out after the Christopher Pyne and Julie Bishop thing. That's regulated entirely by Parliament, right? So, Christopher Pyne...
I mean, I think at the time, which we might have said, but definitely was said, one of the issues about being regulated by Parliament is there's no legal repercussions. Like, really, once people leave Parliament, you can't chase them up for these sorts of things.
Correct. Yeah. And so there's a lot of also professional courtesy extended, right? So the Liberals, for example, the Labor's not criticizing them right now because later on, right, some of them are going, as soon as I leave, I want to go take up this nice cushy job, right? And I don't want the Liberals to stop me from taking it, right? So there's a little bit of professional courtesy that goes there. And they all are kind of like all pigs in the same trough that all realize that this is the way, this is their career path forward. So I think that there does need to be massive reform in that area. And I think the only way you're going to get there is really just by people being like, yes, this is definitely corruption. You should call it corruption. And you should probably change the rules around it.
Yeah, no, I think so. That's probably a good point to leave it on because we've run out of time. So thanks everybody for joining us. Of course, we'll be back again next week, presumably, with more discussion. Thank you, Zeev and Vikas, for being here.
Thank you.
I don't know why I said that. I just did. Out of some weird...
And thank you, Lee.
Thank you. High claps around, claps for us.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody. We'll be back again next time.
Bye.
Next week. Bye now.